So this is 121, and I'm going to do modulate about network forensics and then demo the Android project, which is very simple. And next time I'll just demonstrate Velociraptor, which is the instant response tool. Although I think this stuff is all extra credit, but it's a good thing to know about. Probably the only tool we're going to use in this class besides Autopsy. All right, anyway, well, we'll use Wireshark at some point too, I think. Anyway, so let's start with Module 8, which has a short lecture here, but it's kind of dense. So, all right, so here it is. All right, so network forensics is the, what we've been doing is RAM and hard disk forensics, where you get an image of data collected from a computer or a cell phone, and you look on there for the evidence, the emails, the phone numbers, the SMS messages, and whatever else is there. But another thing you can do is network forensics, where you do not get the image from a device, you get the traffic from the network. You measure it at the router or a switch or a server, you measure the traffic coming in and out, and you examine that. And it also contains, of course, important information about, you can see viruses going by, sensitive data going to the wrong place, and things like that. It's a very important branch of forensics and incident response. And one thing that's really important about it is, if you have somebody hacking you and they put malware on a machine, and then they start putting more of the malware on other machines, if you can analyze the malware and find out what network traffic it uses, you can go to the network and look for the network traffic to find the infected devices. So it's quite useful that way. Anyway, so there's two ways to do it. You can do real-time capture and analysis, or you can do retroactive analysis of captured data. So real-time means you have some kind of device, typically there's a splitter. There's probably another term for it, I can't remember. A device that makes a second copy of all the network traffic. So you can send it to a device, so you measure it in real time, and then you connect it to something that analyzes it in real time, which then detects if it's known suspicious stuff, like known viruses, and will raise alerts or perhaps even block the traffic for that. That's real-time analysis, and the other one is retroactive analysis, where you record the network traffic, or more commonly, you record some kind of summary of the network traffic, and then you analyze that later with tools like Splunk that look through it for when you're doing investigations. So it's commercial tools like Endpoint and EnCase, Endpoint Investigator, RSA, NetWitness, Carbon Black, Splunk, Wireshark. All these can do live analysis. Splunk is how we generally used for retrospective analysis, not usually used in live mode, although it does have a live mode. And Kismet and TCBflow and EtherCap and Scapy are more tools to generate or analyze network traffic. If you take the 123 class, you use Scapy a little bit. Scapy is what you use to generate traffic. And I learned this many years ago when I found a IPv6 exploit that would crash Windows. And somebody else had written the tool that did it, but they didn't experiment with enough to find the way that really killed Windows, so I got Microsoft's attention. And they told me their team uses Scapy to test products, and I didn't know about it. Scapy is a good Python library, so you can generate any kind of network traffic you want. Anyway, wget and curl are command line tools to download files, and so on. So these are all basic tools you use to generate and analyze network traffic. So here's some network devices you should know. A proxy server is a server that stands in front of another server, a normal proxy server stands in front of the internet. So if you're in this room trying to use these machines and you connect to like google.com, you're not really connecting directly to Google. You're going to the proxy, and the proxy fetches Google and lets you see it. City College does not use a forward proxy like that, but most companies do, because that way they can block a website. If there's websites they don't want you going to, like shopping or games or porn or something, they can just have a list of sites you can't go to, and you can't go there, because all you can see is copies of sites on the official proxy, and you don't have any direct connection to the internet at all. Therefore, it's a very common safety measure that way. The other thing about it is it makes your network faster, because if a whole bunch of people go to a page, you only need one copy of that page, and then you serve it up locally without everybody having to fetch it remotely. Now, I do use reverse proxies, though. Let me get a command prompt. All right. So on my website, samsclass.info, if you connect to my website, you are not connecting to my web server. And you can tell if you use dig. You search for my website, you will find that I have two IP addresses for my website, and they're both Cloudflare. In fact, and if you dig for IP version 6 on my website, which is AAAA, you'll find that I also have 2 IPv6 addresses, which would seem pretty cool, but my server is on the cheapest possible cloud server, which is IPv4 only, and only 1 IP address and only 1 server. I don't really have 2 servers or 2 IPv6 addresses. It's all done by Cloudflare. Cloudflare is a free reverse proxy service where they will do this for you. They will give you an address and constantly change these too, and then nobody connects you directly to your server. They're just looking at a copy of the page fetched by Cloudflare. And Cloudflare will move these addresses around, and you're connected to a huge global network of servers, so nobody can take it down. If they try to flood it with traffic to shake it down, Cloudflare blocks all that. They block all the malicious traffic. So it's very nice. And anyway, that's a reverse proxy. So web servers have web pages. They have HTML documents and PHP files and all kinds of other files that come down so you can view web pages. The Uniform Resource Identifier, URI, is the URL up here, https://ccsfinstructure.com/courses. This whole mess up here is the Uniform Resource Identifier. It fetches the page, and when you make an HTTP request to the server, which is what your browser does every time you load a page, you get a response. 200 is what you usually want. That means success at fetching it. 100 is just an informational response. 300 means it has to be redirected somewhere else to find the page. 400 means an error on your client side, and 500 means an error on the server side. And these 500 server-side errors are quite useful when you're trying to hack into websites with things like SQL injection, because if you manage to confuse the server-side software, that usually means you're making progress at hacking in. And so there are a lot of scripting languages up there like PHP and Perl, Java, Ruby, so on. JavaScript more commonly than Java. But anyway, all right. When you boot up a normal client device like a phone or a laptop, it typically does not have a network address consigned because you move it from network to network. And it has to have a different IP address in every network, so it gets the IP address from DHCP. It sends out a broadcast message when it connects to a network saying, I need an IP address. Some server on that network provides an IP address, and then you can join that network. So you can have logs of DHCP traffic, and you will need them when analyzing network traffic at a company, because since network addresses are temporary, if you don't keep a log of them, you will not know what device was using that address when something happened. If you do keep a log, then you can have the MAC address connected to the IP address, and that will give you the ability to track it down to a specific device, although MAC addresses are not 100% reliable. The intention of a MAC address is it's supposed to be a unique identifier of every device, hard-coded on the device, but in fact, even though it's hard-coded on the chip's firmware, when your operating system boots up, the MAC address is copied into the operating system and you can change it there. So you can write code that will change your MAC address to something else. And therefore, that would be a way to defeat this kind of tracking down which device was using your network. But most people don't do that. Then, of course, email servers, we know, send and receive email. And DNS servers resolve domain names to IP addresses, like I just did with Dig. You start with a URL like samsclass.info, and it'll show you the IP addresses. Now, when you do a DNS resolution, like the one I did here, say dig, samsclass.info, I want to know the address, it actually looks a whole lot of places for it. The first place it looks is the local hosts file. On Windows and Linux machines, there is a hosts file, and let me just print the one here. It's on Linux, it's at, I think, hosts. Yep, there it is. So this is the Mac hosts file, which is like the Linux host file, and let me just make it bigger. As you can see, there's nothing much in there. All there is a loopback address for IPv4 and IPv6 going to localhost, and something called broadcast host. And in the Windows case, there's nothing here. This is a really old file. In the early days of the internet, when the internet was first formed, there were only 4 computers on it, 4 servers at major universities. Then they added more, and for years, this was the DNS resolution, was this file, and it was just mailed on floppy disks to companies. You'd get a floppy of the new hosts file. This is what people used. There was no network DNS resolution. And so this is still around as like a legacy system. And you can use it to block ads and stuff. You can put advertising places in here, going to loopback to get rid of them, and such like that. And some anti-spam techniques do. Anyway, that's the thing to know. That's what the local host file is there for. There's malware that changes your host file, for example, so your bank URL will go to a fake bank instead of the real bank. All right, routers connect different networks together. Switches connect devices on the same network. And switches make your network fast because they intelligently route they switch the traffic fast on your network. So if you send a packet from one device in a room to another device in the same room, it sends it just down the cable to get to that one device. Hubs are the older technique. They're just layer 1 connectivity. And so they're stupid. So every packet, every frame that is sent by one device is just repeated every other device on a network, because the hub is not smart enough to know which wire to use. So every frame goes to every other device, and that means it wastes a whole lot of your network bandwidth sending frames to devices that don't want to hear it. That is what wireless networks do, because there's no way to prevent it. Since you cannot have a directional signal on a wireless network, every wireless transmission goes to everyone within range, even though only one of those devices is the intended destination. All right, intrusion detection systems detect attacks, and intrusion prevention systems try to prevent attacks by changing firewall rules or something in response to known attacks. And firewalls analyze traffic and block some of the traffic based on ports, the list of domain names they don't like, and modern firewalls like the Palo Alto firewall are very intelligent. They integrate with your Active Directory infrastructure, and you can have rules like managers can do this, but sales can only do that. And they understand categories like social networking and games and everything else. So they really can do a very sophisticated job of controlling your network traffic. All right. And so here's some more technologies. Pretty Good Privacy is a encryption technique used to encrypt email. It was highly controversial in the 80s and 90s because it used strong public key cryptography, which the U.S. regarded as only for us, and they regarded as a military risk for it to be publicly available to the world, even though the technology has been known since '79 and the math is not that hard. But now everybody has it. IP version 4 and IP version 6, I just mentioned as we went by. The older system is IP version 4. Now we're all gradually switching to the newer system of IP version 6 with these much longer addresses because there were not enough IP version 4 addresses. Subnetting is splitting a group of IP addresses into a subnet that can be referred to as a single unit for purposes of routing traffic. And you'll learn about that if you take Cisco or the NetPlus course. And I talked about MAC addresses, these 48-bit addresses that are intended to uniquely identify every object, every node on a network. Ports are labels added in addition to an IP address. So if I make a connection, like say, I can probably see it if I just do netstat minus an pipe more. There we go. So here are some network sockets. On port 443, this is one of my connections on my web browser. So I have a local address, which is 172.17, which is a private address assigned by the City College Wireless Network. And then I have a port number, which is a high number, 51631. This is typically what you have for the client end of a connection because it's just a temporary number. You're only going to use this until you close that browser tab, and then it will be done. The foreign address goes to port 443, which means it's an HTTPS server. And here's a public address starting with 52. That's probably some web server's IP address, could be mine at Cloudflare or something. So this is called a socket. A local IP address and port number and a remote IP address and port number. Those four things together are a socket, and now you can have two-way transmission between one process on my computer and one process on the server as if they had a cable connecting them that was not mixed up with anybody else's traffic. It's not necessarily encrypted, although this one is with HTTPS, so it might not be private, but it is routed and switched correctly, so that you get traffic from this device going only to the right process over there and the right process down here. So those are the ports. And we've talked, I think, about the OSI and TCP model. Maybe not in this course. These are the layers. And the most important layers are 1, 2, 3, and 4. Layer 1 is physical connections between devices. Layer 2 is where switches are, where traffic is routed by MAC addresses. Layer 3, traffic is routed by IP addresses, and layer 4 is where port numbers are, TCP and UDP ports. Those are the most important parts of this model. And there's voice over IP, is telephone calls and other voice traffic going over the internet. There used to be a separate telephone network. That is not so much true anymore. Most telephone traffic now goes over the same network as the internet, although not all of it. All right, and so then there's incident response, which is a modern technique in response to China hacking Google in, I think, 2010. When Google discovered that the government of China had hacked their servers and told the world about it. This exposed something that had been sort of an open secret in the network. Everybody in America, other companies had been being hacked by China since about 2005, but they never admitted it publicly because it was embarrassing. They didn't want their stock price to go down. Google got so offended when this happened that they went public with it. And so after that, we became aware that all the firewalls and IDSs and everything you buy are not protecting you. Strong attackers, like foreign military, can punch right through that stuff like it wasn't there. And there's nothing you can buy that will really keep them out. So you now have to accept that your security on the network is no better than, say, your physical security. If you have a college like this, people wander in. Sometimes strange, crazy people wander in. How do you really know some lunatic isn't coming in here with a bad thing like a gun? Well, we don't have any physical security, so that could happen. So instead, when you do have inadequate defenses, then you have to have instant response. You have some way to detect when a bad thing is happening and some way to respond when that bad thing happens. And so that's what we all have now. We've all accepted that even though you put up firewalls and whatever defenses you have, and that stops some attacks, your more powerful attackers will get through. And they'll be inside anyway, so you have to monitor your network to detect suspicious activity and then investigate and respond to it, and just accept that it's going to happen now and then, just like every other kind of crime is going to happen. You'll have employees stealing company property, and every bad thing that can happen will be happening to some extent, and you just have to have sort of a response team, like a police force, trying to root out these bad things and hold it down. So you monitor for unusual login attempts, data exfiltration, things going to unusual or forbidden IP addresses, and so on. And then you'll have forensic examiners, a legal team, public relations, human resources, client liaisons, and all that will be involved in instant response. If you do get hacked and a bad guy gets to steal some of your data, now you've got to contact government agencies and the customers and stuff and let people know what happened and try to explain it in a way that won't hurt your company too much. So threat intelligence has become very important. A bunch of companies monitor what the bad guys are doing, and they publish the information so you know what their techniques are and what nation they're from and what kind of people they tend to attack, so you can try to figure out who's most likely to attack you and what defenses to use. And people pay for commercial services here, and there's open source ones. So a lot of there's ISAC, Information Sharing and Analysis Center, Electronic Crimes Task Force, and CISA, which I mentioned before. So it had some recommendations earlier. These are government agencies that help, and all kinds of private companies too. And all this is because of the APTs. They're called Advanced Persistent Threat. This is a military term, I think, from the Navy, but it became the term for these attackers. See, low-level attackers typically want to just smash and grab. They want to break into your server and do something like put up a political message and leave, or steal the credit card numbers and leave. They just want to smash in, steal something, and they're gone. But enemy military typically want to sneak in, put a spy on your network, and hide it well and leave it there for years. So they can just continue to spy on you forever. What China did to most American companies in around 2005 to 2010 was they would put persistent agents inside your network that would capture your intellectual property, PDF files and Word documents and Excel spreadsheets and so on, so they could get all your technical information so they could make Chinese copies of all the technology without having to reinvent it, to violate patents, essentially. And that's what their APTs are, but now many nations are using APT attacks where they sneak in quietly, persist on your network, stealing stuff, and try to be real subtle so you can be there for a long time without you catching them. And when they started tracking down the Chinese attacks in 2010, they found that they would infect you, and they would have agents sneaking data off, and they would have agents that were sleepers, that would sleep for a month, sleep for 3 months, and sleep for 3 years. So you would think you'd clean them off, restore everything, and 3 years later it'll wake up and start sending traffic out again. So they're not messing around. They really are in there, and it's really hard to get them out. Just what you think. It's a military attack. They're not amateurs. So it can be quite difficult, and one of the techniques is they have to have some way to encrypt and sneak the data out of your network. That's how Google caught China. They did not catch them coming in. They did not catch the malware. They caught them exfiltrating data to China. They found their proprietary data going to a Chinese server, which was not part of their company. They said, why is our stuff going to that server? And when they analyzed that, they said, hey, somebody's installing malware on our machines that's sending this. We've been hacked. And so they hacked into that server, which was also illegal, and they found 30 other American companies' data on there, Microsoft, Adobe, and everybody. Then contacted them, and then they went public and told everybody, which exposed something that had been sort of hidden until then. So they hide in a lot of ways. One way they hide is with time stomping. And let me just take a look. Yes, what I thought. I thought this was a short one. All right. Time stomping is where you change all the timestamps. So a file appears to be like the official Windows file dating back to the time Windows was written instead of an altered file. So the cyber kill chain. This is the Lockheed Martin kill chain, this one. There's a variety of them. So what they had here was you do reconnaissance to investigate a network, then you do weaponization to develop to make some kind of attack tool, then you deliver it, you exploit the service, then you have command and control, where you have a persistent agent inside the network and you have an external agent controlling it, so you can give it commands, steal this network, move over here, attack this thing, and then you have exfiltration, where you sneak the stolen data out of the network somehow. That's a simple model. I should mention the more modern model, which I think is better, is the MITRE attack. This is the latest thing that is used for this. The MITRE ATT&CK Enterprise Matrix has more steps. So you have reconnaissance, then resource development, where you develop the tools like cloud servers you're going to use. You find some kind of initial access, which is most often phishing, where you somehow get some way to have access to the system and execute code somewhere in the network. Then you have some way to persist across reboots, so you maintain persistent control of something inside the network. Then you elevate privileges from a local user to a local administrator to a network administrator. Domain administrator is what you usually want. You have some way to avoid defenses like antivirus and other tools that are being used to stop you. Then you have some way to steal credentials, some way to discover other devices and information, some way to move and take over other devices and to collect data from them. And then the command and control from outside to control your bots inside the network, and some way to exfiltrate data or perform whatever other impacts you may have, for example, to just destroy systems. There are destructive attacks that just are wipers. They get to your important servers and wipe them out because it's just sort of like a destructive military attack with a missile. They just want to hurt the company. They don't even want to steal their stuff. And so this is the most well-respected modern way to sort of organize your thinking. And you can consider all these techniques and then what defenses would stop them and such. But it started with the Lockheed Martin kill chain, which was a simpler version of the same thing. So that's what this is. And by the way, so when they collect information about your target, they might scan your network, but they might also just do things that don't go to your network at all, like go to Google libraries and see your job postings, press releases, forums, Facebook, LinkedIn. You know, there used to be a common detective technique to go through your trash to find stuff. These days, they hardly need to bother. They just go on Facebook, and everything about your life is just right there. All right. So then you put malicious code somewhere, deliver it in there some way, usually with phishing, and some way you cause that code to execute inside the system, and then you remotely control that device with the command and control server so you can modify your attack and try various things, and then you eventually exfiltrate whatever you're stealing if you're there to steal things, which the most common thing is you're there to steal things, but all those, like 12 or 14 steps in the MITRE ATT&CK, people don't usually do all those. Those are possible things you could do, but individual campaigns might just use certain techniques. They might not, for example, care about stealing data. They might want to just destroy things. And so these are called tactics, techniques, and procedures. These are what a threat actor does, and you can mark them by this. And so this is how people attribute them. They look at the malware they dump, they look at what they did, and they compare it to known TTPs and they decide which threat actor appears to be doing it. So Yara is a very simple tool that is really a little more than grep. Yara just does text matching of files. It's a very fast way to detect files, to identify files, so you can find ones that deserve further analysis or ones that appear to be known, contain strings that identify them as known malicious. I talked about persistence, where you can remain on the system even if the system reboots. DIL sideloading is the #1 most common way that malware executes on Windows machines. Windows programs have dynamic link loading of libraries, so when the program is running, it can say, oh, I need to load a library and use a function, and it will load that library, so you trick it into loading a malicious library instead of the real library. This is the most common way to get code to execute on the system. So remediation, when you find an intrusion, then you remediate when you block it. Typically, the first thing is to isolate it, like putting out the fire. You isolate the infected part of the network so it won't spread to other parts. and you can block the network traffic. Then you analyze the malware that's there, and you find indicators of compromise, which are things that are easy to find that identify the compromised machines, like presence of a file or some network traffic or a registry key. And then you try to clean up systems, and you have to verify that your remediation worked. Very often it will not work because you find some malware, you find some signatures, but you don't find them all. So when you clean them off, the bad guys have other malware you didn't detect, and they just come back. So there's often the issue. The best thing is to find the root cause analysis where you know exactly what happened and how they got in. Then you have a eradication event where you kick them out and plug all the holes so they can't get back in. That is the best thing. Typically, you can only do that if you have a real experienced, professional, expensive team like Mandiant coming in to do it. Mandiant is the one that responded to the original Chinese attack at Google, and they invented the APT technique and basically modern instant response. They are the best, most experienced, most powerful, and I imagine most expensive team. And all the really big companies that get hacked, they hire Mandiant. They shoot in and find a team of consultants that have done this to have special tools and everything. And I teach 2 classes based on Mandiant materials here. The malware analysis and the instant response classes are both following the Mandiant's textbooks, which is the thing to do. Anyway, so indicators of compromise are things that detect that the bad guy has compromised the system. So registry, keys, DIL files, you might find things in a prefetch file, but you want something that's not too hard to find, something where you can quickly collect data from the system and decide whether it's infected or not. All right. And of course, the logs are what's intended for this. The logs are intended to track down problems. So if you can find log entries that are not being deleted, they can be quite helpful. So RAM, as we've done before, is an important place to find IOCs. You'll find network connections and such. The shim cache we've talked about before. This is a tool that shows what applications have been run. And shell bags identify what folders have been opened. So that gives you more trace of who's been opening what files and folders. And the shadow copy has backup copies of files. So if somebody has been doing something on a machine and then erasing the files, you will find evidence in the shadow copies that happened. This is quite common. The bad guy will take over a system, download some malware, install some malware, run it, and then delete it and uninstall it because they only want to use it once, and it will still be in the shadow copies if they didn't remember to erase them. And so Carbon Black is an endpoint protection system. I think it's from VMware now. And Kibana is, I'm not quite sure what Kibana is. I think another commercial one. Log2 Timeline is, I know a timeline tool that comes with the SandShift workstation, this might be it, that just tries to organize log events and other things in a nice timeline. I know Splunk can do that for you. And the SandShift workstation is a special Linux distribution. If you take the SANS classes, which are considered the best, they're also the most expensive. SANS has classes in all these network and security techniques, and they always use the special Linux distribution, and there's not much in the way of publicly available materials outside the SANS classes. That's why I don't use it much. I use other things like Kali or just plain Debian. But anyway, this is what, if people take SANS, they'll get used to using this thing called SIFT, which is just a Linux distribution with a bunch of forensic and security tools on it. There's a lot of others. Anyway, those are some things to know about. So let's try some Coots. And I should have them here. There we go. An autopsy is one of the many things you'll find on that SandShift workstation, of course. If you get a chance to take SANS courses, you should. And sometimes students can get in for free or at a discount by volunteering and helping or something at conferences. I've had students do that. But you don't want to pay for them. That's where most people only start taking SANS courses after their boss gives them a training budget. Spend your boss's money on it. It can be like $5,000 to take a course. But they're very good courses. All of my courses are essentially imitation SANS courses. Still coming in. All right. Looks like we got enough people. All right, so what does the hosts file do? It does DNS resolution. Just a list of domain names and the matching IP addresses. And if something is in the hosts file, your machine will not look any further. It will not ask the router or any internet servers. It will just believe whatever's in the hosts file first. All right, what device sends all packets to every host on a network? It's a hub, and by the way, technically that word should be node. Technically, a host is a device with an IP address, but a node is just any device on a network, and this is at layer 2, so node would be a better word. But anyway, hubs send it to every device. Every frame they receive is sent to every node. So your network card is constantly getting frames that are not intended for you, which is relatively wasteful. But it's all there was until switches became popular about 20 years ago. All right, so what are the powerful attackers that come from hostile military? Anyway, this was the problem. Our defenses were supposed to stop low-level attackers like, hackers trying to steal credit card numbers, and they were not powerful enough to stop this stuff. Those are the advanced resistant threats, causing us to have to greatly increase our network security measures to stop these guys. All right, so what phase of an attack communicates with an external server to get instructions? All right, that's command and control. By the way, speaking of advanced resistant threats, what is the most dangerous advanced resistant threat actor in the world? Common ones are China, Japan, North Korea, Iran, but what's the one that's most dangerous in the world, do you think? Of course, America. That's the right answer. They call us the equation group. Of course, we are the most dangerous in cyberspace, just like anywhere else. We don't think of it that way, but of course, that's why every time you complain to the Chinese and say you're hacking us, they say, we're hacking you, you're hacking us. And they're right, of course. That's right. But from their point of view, we're the one that's outrageously hacking everybody, and they're probably right about that. That's why, I hate to see these bad relations with China because, their complaints about us are not wrong, We really are denying them stuff, strangling them, and hacking them. Of course, our complaints about them aren't wrong either. They really are stealing stuff that we want them to pay for. So, this is, I guess, how you end up in wars. The two sides both have grievances. And
Russia, China, and who else is getting together with the oil?
Yep. Yes, Saudi Arabia now, that's right.
Saudi Arabia is supposed to be our ally.
They are, and yet they seem to, they're pretty unhappy with us, which is what Biden said he would do. He said he would make them a pariah. That's why Trump wanted to be friends with him. Biden wanted to be enemies with him until he needed their oil. Then he tried to cozy up to them. They said, I'm sort of fed up with you. I'm going to go be partners with Russia and China instead. It's tough, international relations.
Saudi Arabia just joined